right, looks like the attendees are jumping on. So I think you can go ahead and get started. If people have questions, they can type into the Q&A or raise their hand. And then we'll go through those questions.
Make Keith Larson a panelist.
These are jumping on. Yes. Oops. Let's do this. Attendees. Keith Larson. Promote to panelist. Anyone else that we need to make a panelist?
Let's add Greg Allington as a panelist.
Okay.
Derek Hamilton.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's add Bobby Preet. Craig Bagley. Jeremy Lappin.
Yes.
And is the 435 Hollis?
I am not sure.
Okay, I'll find out. I'll take roll call. Can you add Norm?
I'm here. Finally.
Hey, Jeremy.
Sorry, I was having issues with that.
No worries.
And then Jason Roper.
Hey, Jamie, Norm here.
Hi, Norm.
And just so everyone's aware, this is officially a public meeting. It's also being broadcast to YouTube for the public.
Okay, I think we have everybody that I need as a panelist, so we can go ahead and get started. Is my screen sharing?
Yes, your screen is sharing.
Okay.
Feel free to get started.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Saratoga Springs Watershed Planning A virtual public scoping meeting. I appreciate everyone joining us today. We have 11 panelists and 5 attendees. There is one phone number out there. The rest I can see names. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items, and I think that on the back end we're able to keep everyone muted unless I call on them to speak, but if possible, and as a reminder, this is recorded. Please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. There is an opportunity to submit a comment, or you raise your hand if you want to make a comment, and we'll call on you at the end of the presentation. Okay, so just to begin, I just want to let everyone see this flyer, this mailer that was sent out. It was sent out to the federal and state agencies, county departments, and other interest groups, tribal leaders, and adjacent property owners. For more information, you can go to this link, but there's actually another link that I'm going to flash up that's more specific to the project. The comments for this scoping meeting will be received until August 3rd. You can also email me at saratogawatershed@bowencollins.com. And before we begin, I'd like to take roll call if I could. We'd like to document everyone who's in attendance, and I'll first start with the panelists, and then we'll go through the attendees. I'll start by introducing myself. I am Jamie Sandes with Bowen Collins and Associates. I'm an environmental consultant, and I am managing the project. You will be listening mostly to my voice today, but I do have others on the call, other panelists that will also be chiming in. So let me go ahead and David, I don't know if you're able to mute everybody as I call their name, but I will just want them to introduce themselves, their name, who they work for, and their role in the project.
Yeah, so as you call their name, they can unmute themselves. I have everyone muted, but they can unmute themselves for
Okay. Great. All right, let's start with Keith Larson.
Keith Larson, I'm with Bowen Collins and Associates, and I am helping with the engineering analysis of the project.
Great, thank you. Bobby. I'll give her a minute to unmute herself.
I think I figured it out. Thank you. Bobby Preet. I'm with McMillan Jacobs Associates, senior resource consultant helping in preparation of the Watershed Plan environmental assessment.
Thank you. Craig?
Craig Bagley, an engineer with Bowen Collins and Associates.
Thanks, Craig. Derek?
Hey, Derek Hamilton with NRCS, Watershed Resources Coordinator. I help administer the Watershed program at the state office here in Salt Lake City.
Thank you. Gordon?
Oh, I guess I was gonna start my video, but there's difficulty with that. Anyway, Gordon Miner, I'm the city engineer for
Great.
Saratoga Springs.
Thank you. Greg?
Greg Allington with McMillan Jacobs Associates. I'm working with Bobby Preet on the Watershed Plan and Environmental Assessment.
Great, thank you. Jason?
I'm Jason Roper. I'm with NRCS. I am the state civil engineer, so I represent NRCS in the engineering.
Thank you. All right, I'm going down. Jeremy?
Jeremy Lappin, Public Works Director for the city of Saratoga Springs, and I'm managing the project for the city.
Thank you. And our last panelist is Norm.
Yeah, Norm Evanstead, NRCS. I'm the Assistant State Conservation for Partnerships and the Watershed Operations Program Manager.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the attendees. There is a phone number, area code 435. David, are we able to unmute?
The attendees are muted, but yeah, I can allow each to talk. So, yep, we've got the phone number. And go ahead.
It's Hollis Jenks, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm the project manager for Utah County.
Great, thanks, Hollis. Thanks for joining us. Carrie? I think
Yeah, and either way, we have the list of all the attendees as well on record. So,
as far as their agency that they're calling from as well.
yeah, all the information, whether they're a resident or with their specific agency, we've got the list of all that information.
I think, so I'll just call them out loud. Carrie Young, Carolyn Gleason, Jessica Shepard, and Nancy Williams. I think all of them are from agencies. So we will, okay, we'll move on. So one person that we are waiting to join who notified me that he'll be joining late is a representative from SITLA. So once he joins, we'll probably have him be included as a panelist as well.
And the phone number was Hollis?
The phone number is Hollis Jenks, yep.
Hollis, okay. I'll put that in.
Great, okay. So I'll start with this slide. This is the location of our project area. This yellow area is our initial project study, our only project that we had within this watershed. It is to evaluate the existing clay pits that are currently being leased on SITLA land. And it's my understanding that those clay pits, the lease will expire soon. So we are evaluating, and they currently hold water. So we're looking at whether those clay pits can continue to hold water if they're currently not designed to do that. So finding ways to develop some basins that meet NRCS standards and prevent a flooding downstream. Since we started this project, I think many people have probably heard about the Knowles Fire, the recent burn area. And that's something that was just brought to my attention this week as a possible study a boundary that we should add into this project. So this has been included for discussion today. This boundary was provided by the BLM to Saratoga Springs. You can tell that it's a fairly significant burn boundary. The land within that area, and you'll see it later on in these slides, is owned by private property owners, BLM, and SITLA. So the purpose of today's meeting is to explain the project, explain the NEPA process, discuss project issues, and then receive input from our panelists and also our attendees. The purpose of this project is to protect downstream residents from future flooding, specifically for this top one pertaining to the clay pits and that yellow boundary that I had shown on the previous slides. Provide slope stabilization for the drainage areas flowing near the clay pits, minimize flooding to downstream homes and development. Look at some detention basin and sedimentation within the clay pit area, either further up closer to the watershed or the drainage boundaries, or further down where the clay pits exist. And as I mentioned, the clay pits are currently functioning as storage, but they are not designed to actually store water. And then adding a discussion to restore the burn area and prevent erosion flooding from those recent fires. So this is the website for the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, the PL 566 program that the NRCS has. I'm just showing this to show where our project falls down here, the Saratoga Springs watershed. And if you want to get to that link, that's where we'll post the project information as well as the video from today. Here it is blown up. This will take you directly to this page, and then you just click on that Saratoga Springs and there will be some information that will be posted there. So where are we now? We started this project in the summer of 2019. We met with Saratoga Springs and SITLA. We conducted a site visit, and we started some preliminary engineering analysis, mostly modeling of the channels and the basins to identify where the water was flowing, and if it could all be contained within the clay pit areas, or if we need to evaluate other alternatives. Today, we are conducting our purpose and need public scoping, where we'd like to listen to some ideas, develop alternatives, and then continue our preliminary engineering. Going into the fall, we'd like to do our field work and develop our 30% design engineering alternatives. Our field work will include cultural resources. We'll look at wetlands and waters, biological and wildlife, vegetation clearances, including threatened and endangered, both biological and wildlife and vegetation for threatened and endangered species, some geotechnical investigations and topographic surveys. We'll follow that with some engineering of 30% engineering drawings. These are not final design drawings at this stage. We only take it to about 30%. And then this fall and winter, we will roll into our final NEPA document. 2021 and 2022, we'll get into final design and construction if this project falls into a category to provide for further funding and construction. So the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, part of the PL 83566. I'm actually going to turn this time over to Greg Allington, who's with McMillan Jacobs, and he will be leading the NEPA effort, and we'll start with this slide and start talking a little bit more about the NEPA process. Greg, you able to unmute yourself? Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. So NRCS is basically coming to the table with this project and bringing funding. And that's why we are going through this NEPA watershed plan and environmental assessment preparation process, what we're calling the planning process. And the funding mechanism is the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act. We refer to it as PL 83566, probably just call it PL 566 going forward during this meeting and in the project itself. But it has three general purposes: preventing damage from erosion, floodwater, and sediment, furthering the conservation, development, utilization, and disposal of water, and furthering the conservation and proper utilization of land. So right now we are looking at this project under the first bullet there, which is preventing damage from erosion, floodwater, and sediment. But we're also taking other comments and ideas that may include the other two bullet points. There are a couple planning constraints, the big ones that we have noticed on these type of projects. The first one is that the watershed area that would be protected has to be less than 250,000 acres. And this is kind of the big one we've been looking at recently is if NRCS contributes more than $25 million to a project, it automatically kicks this project into a watershed plan and environmental impact statement. Right now, we're looking at a watershed plan and environmental assessment, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. We don't foresee this going over $25 million at this point, and so we are looking at the Plan EA process. Next slide, please.
Whoops, sorry about that.
So the NEPA Plan EA process, and Jamie went over this a little bit in the where are we now slide, so I'll breeze through this pretty quickly. But you know, the first thing we did with the project is conduct the kickoff meeting with the internal project team, NRCS, Saratoga Springs, and ourselves, the consulting team, to basically, hey, this is what the process is and what do we want to do? The next thing, data search, data collection, basically identifying, hey, what is the actual problem? How much data is existing out there and what new data do we really need to gather for this process? So preliminary engineering hydrology modeling, which has already been completed and Jamie discussed. Then we meet with the agency, Saratoga Springs, conduct site visit, look at the project area, and basically brainstorm about, hey, what's happening and what's going on some more. Right now, we're currently in the public scoping meeting. As Jamie said, the comment period is open until August 3rd, 2020. Then field reconnaissance, which includes looking at it some more, resource surveys for waters of the US, threatened endangered species, cultural resources, things like that, along with any sort of engineering, which includes geotechnical analysis and any other topographic survey that might be required. Take that information and develop a conceptual design for the project. We call it about a 30% design. It's maybe somewhere between a 15 and 30% design for the project, but it's basically enough conceptual design that we can analyze the project in the NEPA environmental assessment document. And then as associated with that concept design is the engineering report, which describes all of the analysis, and specifically for flood prevention, we do a lot of hydrology analysis to figure out, hey, how much water is actually coming down into this watershed? And for example, if a detention basin needed to be created, well, what size does it need to be able to handle a certain size storm event, such as the 100-year or 500-year storm event, things like that. So the NEPA process is, so we got the concept design process, and then we've got the NEPA Plan EA process. And we are in NEPA because federal funding requires analysis of the project under NRCS regulations. So we're starting, this is the very beginning of it. We're getting the project started in the planning phase. We reached out to cooperating agencies, basically to determine if other federal and state agencies are interested in the project and if they would like to be a cooperating agency on this NEPA environmental assessment, which basically means if they were to be part of the project, they don't have to develop their own environmental assessment. They would basically adopt NRCS's environmental assessment, since NRCS is the lead federal agency. Public scoping and comment period, which we're at right now, 30 days. So we're identifying resource concerns as well as any engineering or basically environmental issues associated with the project. Concept design and engineering analysis. Once we get that, we will reach out to the other agencies, Army Corps of Engineers for waters of the US and wetlands, Fish and Wildlife Service for threatened and endangered species, SHPO for cultural resources, cooperating agencies, state agencies, stakeholders. I think the main point to take away is we're going to develop a concept design and we're going to let everybody who's interested in it take a look at it and comment on it. Next slide, please. So again, we are looking at the project through the NEPA environmental assessment, and we're assessing the environmental effects on the project. Prior to NRCS making the official decision to approve the project, require additional analysis, which would then kick it into an environmental impact statement, or deny the project. So there's two basic objectives, and this is the NRCS state conservationist that will ultimately make this decision and sign either a FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact, or kick it into an environmental impact statement. So they need to ensure that decision makers consider the environment and planning projects, both natural and man-made, as well as prevent, minimize damage to the environment. It's basically good, we kind of joke about it, but it's good decision-making by doing what's best for the community as well as what's best for the environment. And here's a quick little diagram about NEPA decision-making. We take in social impacts from the community, environmental impacts, biological and physical, economic impacts. So if we develop this project, well, how much is it going to cost? And is this have a positive cost benefit ratio, meaning by implementing the project, the funds that we're using are actually going to have a greater benefit to the community by reducing, well, for example, flood damages and things like that. So there's a very extensive economic evaluation that goes into part of these projects. We take public input. So right now, any members of the public or agencies that are interested in the project, really encourage you to submit your comments for the scoping period. You'll get another chance during the draft Plan EA period, which actually will describe the preferred alternative. And then we also coordinate with any tribes that may be interested in the project as well. So these are the resources that we look at as part of the Plan EA process. I will save you the time. I'm not going to read every single one of these, but it's basically grouped into 6 different categories. Acronym is SWAPA. So we look at soils, water, air, plants, animals, and then the human environment. And then we don't look at all of these. During the scoping process, we will actually eliminate ones that we don't feel are relevant to the project and eliminate it from further analysis. I'm going to tell you right now, we probably won't be looking at coral reefs for the project in this area. So that's an example of what we would eliminate. So this is the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program authorized purpose. So as we're looking at the project, we have to identify, okay, well, this is the project, this is what we want to do, but what authorized purpose does it fall under? And there's quite a few of them. So right now we're looking probably at flood protection, but we might be able to bring in some other components to the project that would be part of watershed protection. We've worked on projects where public recreation is part of it as well. So this is something that the project team is looking at as we move forward with the conceptual design of the project. And then each one of these authorized purposes can have a different NRCS cost share. For example, flood protection, the first one on the list, has 100% NRCS cost share for construction. That's a pretty big deal because not all of those have that. And when you're talking about building a dam or a detention basin or some sort of flood protection measure, it can get a little spendy, and NRCS is or can provide up to 100% of that. This will be all, whatever authorized purpose we do identify for the project will be outlined in the draft Plan EA. So NEPA process. So after the scoping period, we develop the concept design. We will then develop an internal preliminary draft Plan EA. There's quite an extensive internal review process that NRCS goes through along with cooperating agencies before it ever goes out to the public. So once we get through our internal process, and this might take 6 months to a year and a half, depending on the complexity of the project, we will then issue the document out for draft Plan EA. That's when agencies and public get a chance to review the preferred alternative as well as other alternatives that we looked at and possibly eliminated. And then you get to comment on that. Once we get the 30-day comment period ends, we will take all comments, we will assess them, we'll make a response and update the final Plan EA accordingly, or if applicable. Then NRCS will issue a final Plan EA, and if the state conservationist finds that there's no significant impact, they will issue a finding of no significant impact, and the project will move to the final design. Once that's all complete, our project team will develop an administrative record which documents all decisions made in the process that we performed as we went through the NEPA process, and that will be on the NRCS file. And that's pretty much the summary of the NEPA process. It's a little bit complicated, and I'm definitely welcome questions if there are any at the end of this presentation. Back to you, Jamie.
Great, thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're gonna just talk a little bit about what our initial scope and project area was, and I'm gonna have Keith chime in here in a little bit, but I'll just give an overview. The Utah Lake is to the right, Redwood Road, and then just for some bearings, here's Grandview Boulevard. We don't have any other major roads out here. The clay pits that we are referring to are these areas down here, and the development further downstream. So there are two basins that we looked at. Both of these basins are on BLM, mostly on BLM land. We looked at whether all the water that comes down through these areas can be held in these clay pits. We've looked at splitting them up with the two channels and looking at two basins up further and combining them into one channel, flowing down through this development and then connecting to some existing infrastructure that's down below. Keith, is there anything that you want to point out with our study and what we've done so far here with our analysis?
I guess I would just add, one of the big challenges is with all of these mountains west of Utah Lake, the Lake Mountains here, all of them discharge into alluvial fan areas. And so essentially once they hit the mouth of the canyon or the drainages, they're relatively unpredictable in where they'll go. There are currently channels that exist, but most of them are undersized for capacity. And so projecting flooding is difficult. With clay pits, they have historically acted as detention, but there is really some question as to whether, as we move in the future, whether that is a viable solution, even if you can preserve those clay pits, because of the variability and unpredictability of flow in this area. One other thing I would just note relative to how we got to this particular area is, if you notice on the photo there, you can see, Jamie, I don't know if you can point that out, but there is a secondary water pond, yes, right above your hand, right there. Right to the south of that is the Israel Canyon Detention Basin, and that currently protects the next drainage basin to the south of the Lake Mountains here, where there's been some significant flooding in the past. That is the largest basin or drainage basin in the area. The drainage basin that we're looking at is the second largest area along these mountains, and thus is an area where we have some concern. I think that's what all I'd add for right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Keith. So this is a Google aerial just showing a little more closely these drainages that we were talking about. You can see a lot of these little fingers that are coming down into these areas and collecting into the clay pits. This is the secondary water that Keith was referring to. You can't see the other basin, but it is to the right of this page. Here's a photo of the clay pits. I'm not sure if this photo does it justice. They are quite deep, almost canyon-like when you get in there and stand. And then an example of some of the drainages and how they look that are flowing down into the clay pits. This is looking.
That's a pretty good sized drainage right there. But as you go up higher, you'll notice it gets a little bit smaller, indicative of this alluvial fan type discharge.
So that's what I have as far as the clay pits go. I'm going to roll a little bit into the Knowles fire and show the boundary again with the property ownership overlaid. Like I had mentioned before, this is the green is the BLM, Sitla owned land, so 50-50 almost in there. And then you do have some private property ownership, as well as probably some municipal land. So I took these from the Daily Herald and some photos that I was able to find on the internet showing the burn as it was starting. And then a side-by-side, one from the Deseret News and one from Standard Examiner that showed the fire moving through the hillside there. So as you can tell, the burn area is pretty significant. And this, I believe, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the secondary water that we were just talking about, or is that further away? Just to give everyone an idea of the proximity of this fire to, I guess it's not, it's probably not the same, but it is fairly close to our other project site. So just as a reminder, this is the website that you can go to if you would like more information about this project. If you want to view this video again, and then download additional information as the project moves forward. And that takes me to
I'm sorry, we can add that link to the city website and in the YouTube video that will be on our city YouTube channel as well.
Perfect, thank you. So this is the end of the presentation. I'm actually going to scroll back up to the main graphic here and answer any questions and discuss any alternatives or other issues that people want to talk about, if there are any. And I think the panelists can unmute themselves, right, David, if they want to speak?
That is correct.
Okay.
And this time we don't have any questions from any of the attendees.
Okay. If there are any questions from any attendees, you're welcome to raise your hand at this time and then we can address them.
Virtually, not physically.
Not physically, virtually. It looks like Nancy Williams has a question.
Let's see. All right, let's go to Nancy. Sorry, Nancy, I'm trying to make it so that you can speak. Just one second.
And Nancy, when we do unmute you, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and agency.
There you go, Nancy.
Okay.
Nancy, can you speak now?
Am I good?
Yes. Yes, go ahead, please.
This is Nancy Williams. I work for the Bureau of Land Management in the Salt Lake Field Office. I'm a wildlife biologist. My question is the proposed project at this point just those two catchment basins that are above the clay pits?
Yes, that is currently what we're looking at. And they don't necessarily have to be catchment basins. We're looking at alternatives of ways to transport that water and capture all of those drainages. But that is the current area that we're looking at. And if there are other areas, other alternatives or other projects that you'd like us to take into consideration, that we are open to that as well.
So at the moment, where you stand, the project's entirely on Sitla land?
Correct.
Okay.
I believe, I would throw out, hey, this is Derek Hamilton. I believe it's Sitla and private owned lands that would be affected.
Yes, let me go to this here. So this is Sitla land here. If we were to do basins, they would be located primarily on Sitla land. If we cross this with a channel and go further down, then we do get into private land. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any concerns from the BLM's perspective on what we're showing on the screen here?
Not at this point in time.
Okay. Okay, great. Carolyn has her hand raised as well.
Carolyn, you should be able to speak now.
Hi there, this is Carolyn Gleason with the Region 8 EPA headquarters. I am kind of interested in hearing how and if the planned channel kind of downstream of this potential basin is connected to Utah Lake. So how going through private land would it be connected to the Utah Lake, if at all?
Keith, do you mind answering that question?
Sure. So one of the consequences of the clay pits being where they are right now is that historically there has not been a lot of drainage seen downstream. As a result, much of the natural drainage from this this basin no longer exists, has been affected by farming operations prior to development and then development in more recent years. So currently, from the end of the blue line that Jamie is showing on this stream or this screen, there is an existing channel that goes to the north until it runs into Grandview Boulevard. At that point, it is intercepted in a pipeline that travels to the east, and a portion of it continues in the pipeline down to Utah Lake, and another portion of it travels in. You can see a little bit of there's an old abandoned canal just to the west of Redwood Road. And a portion of it goes into that canal and travels down through storm drain facilities, again to Utah Lake. There is no natural channel that connects to Utah Lake, but there is that pipeline and the abandoned canal, which turns into some drainage pipelines and swales down below as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so at this time, you're not expecting to need to construct additional infrastructure closer to the lake?
I wouldn't think so. I think that is one option that we will need to look at. I think it's a very difficult alternative given the amount of development that currently exists.
Makes sense. But for now, it looks as though you'll only go as far as that blue line that was shown on that other figure.
Correct. I think that's the most likely alternative.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? There are no other hands raised under the attendees. If there's anything from the panelists, I'll just give you guys a few minutes to unmute yourselves and ask any questions.
Jamie, is there, this is Keith Larson, is there anything that needs to be discussed relative to potential projects associated with the Knowles fire?
I think that that's something that's a good topic to talk about. And I know we have the BLM on, and I don't know if Nancy has had a chance to visit the site, or if Jeremy has had a chance to visit the site, if they know what would be needed and some of the things that we need to consider. Let's see.
This is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect. Yes.
Yeah, I know they had a field tour. Our ESR team had a field tour there last week. I wasn't able to make it, and they're in the process of preparing an ESR plan, which should be coming out pretty quick, but unfortunately I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
So Jamie, this is Norm Evanstead.
Hi, Norm.
I guess relating to the Knowles fire and that boundary, and then we also have our boundary for the PL 566 watershed plan. The boundary for the watershed plan can be adjusted if we wanted to include, the resource concerns for the fire and include that into our Plan EA. If that's something that the city as the sponsor and or the other stakeholders want to consider, that's something that we can look at and put in a request for those adjustments in the planning boundary.
Okay.
And then whatever else that would go with that, as far as maybe funding to add in that scope for the project. And so that could be an opportunity there to, to extend that boundary to include, the concerns for the post-fire conditions. And the one thing, I guess, in the past, NRCS has done EWP, emergency watershed protection projects, where we have installed debris basins or catchment basins. And we're really trying to get away from that with the emergency program and stick to real much quicker type of measures that can be installed. With any dam, it takes quite a bit of planning and engineering to put a structure like that in. So we're trying to focus more on quick measures for the emergency watershed program, and then any other maybe larger type structures, then we want to do that with the watershed, the PL 566 program. So I just wanted to put that out there for the group and for the sponsors, for that's something that we could consider.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One more thought from the BLM, which may not be an issue at all, but we're working on a programmatic recreation plan for the Lake Mountains for the BLM lands that will be developing some facilities for non-motorized trails and recreation. I'm not sure it reflects on this project at all, but just a heads up.
Within this area?
Yes.
Okay.
On BLM lands.
On BLM lands, okay. Great. So I think this helps maybe show the proximity to, these are the clay pits right here, and then the fire boundary. So in the previous slides, I think I was getting this confused with this secondary irrigation. But we are still relatively close. Okay. Well, I'll just give everyone just another minute here if anyone has any other questions. And again, as a reminder, to go to this website for additional information where this video will be posted.
Jamie, this is Norm again. Another real short version of that long string there for the website location is just www.bit.ly and then /waterops, and that'll take you to the same page.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I don't think there are any other questions or discussions, so I will adjourn the meeting. I appreciate everyone for calling in and attending. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And as a reminder, public comments are due on August 3rd. I believe that's a Friday.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.